Hello, King's Church Lewis Youth, and whoever may stumble across this video. I just for a while have had a heart to put together a video that just goes through a load of like evidences for Jesus and the Christian faith in a way that can hopefully encourage the faith for those that already believe, and maybe help those of you watching this video who currently don't believe and need a bit of help towards believing to have a load of things that can hopefully increase your faith towards believing in something I very much found to be beyond true in my life. And the longer I live, the more I just find things that just validate what I believe in. So I'm going to go through a whole ream of things. I'm going to try and do it as concisely as I can so that this video is watchable and not too long. So I'll start with this. So Brian Cox did a video. Well, he was part of a video fairly recently. I feel like this is the guy that people look to for sort of like the font of science facts. And he said this. He said, "We don't know how the universe got hot and dense. We don't even know if it had a beginning." Or if it is even eternal. And essentially, the point is, scientists don't even know if God is real or not. They're left with unanswered questions. And that's why many scientists have actually come to believe in God's existence, such as Isaac Newton, Francis Collins, Galileo, Kepler, Pascal, and Max Planck, or Planck, or however you say his name. And Brian Cox himself is like, it would be actually ridiculous of us as scientists to say that God isn't real because we have definitely not disproved him. If anything, there is a door wide open that, of things we can't explain where God, I suppose, could essentially explain the unexplainable. So that's an initial thing when people try and say science has disproved God. It absolutely hasn't. Um, Another thing in relation to sort of thinking about science and things, in the Bible it says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature have clearly been seen, understood from what's been made, so that people are without excuse, essentially without excuse for not believing in God." So Paul here is like, look at the world around you. It's just immense. The creation is incredible. Like evidence for God is screaming all around us in terms of how this has been made and has created without, essentially, yeah, with a God behind it, a divine creator and designer. And recently, some astronauts went up to space. This chap called Reed Wiseman, not a Christian, but he said this when they were out in space, they were looking back at the Earth and they saw this moment of an eclipse. He said this, "When the sun eclipsed behind the moon, I said, I don't think humanity has evolved to the point of being able to comprehend what we're looking at right now because it was otherworldly and it was amazing." And he was basically just like, me and the other astronauts in that moment essentially encountered a god, or he couldn't put into words actually what they experienced. But he was like, this was out of this world. Like he was kind of saying something beyond our understanding, our human understanding, could only explain what we experienced in that incredible moment. And he was basically saying, like, I think there's something to do with God here that could help to explain this. And there was a fellow Christian on board. Sorry, a chap who was a Christian. This guy wasn't a Christian, and he was just saying, like, it just blew my mind in terms of, just basically pointing to a creator, pointing to more in this life than we know it as a creator God. So that was really cool, and it testified to Romans 1:20 with a recent example of that. Some of you in youth have heard this before. The world is ridiculously intricate and so perfectly balanced in order for life to be able to exist as we know it. There's so many variables that have to be just right for life to exist, such as the distance the moon is from the Earth for tides to function, and the distance the sun is from the Earth, and the amount of oxygen and sort of gas levels of different kind of whatever the wordings are for those different elements. I think I'm looking for like all of these factors have to be perfect. Like even if certain things were like inches different or percentages different to what they are, life would not exist as we know it. So mathematically speaking, the chance of the world being created like this without God is just ridiculously massively unlikely. Some huge number of unlikelihood probability. And yeah, essentially, you'd be more likely to win the lottery a million times in a row and get struck by lightning every single time you won than the Earth existing and sustaining life as we know it without a God. And I was actually being quite generous with the million term there. I think the number's way bigger than the million chance I mentioned, but it's just easier to use that example with the term a million. So, the odds of winning the lottery and getting struck by lightning as it is once are just ridiculous. A million times in a row for both of those every single time. Again, I find it easier to believe that God's behind all of this than that. Next one, is there any evidence for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection? Well, from historical evidence, Jesus was definitely a real person. That's written not just in the Bible, but historians today would say he was definitely a real person. They'd also say he definitely was killed by crucifixion, as the Bible would teach. And then in the Bible, it says there were over 500 witnesses who claimed to have seen Jesus after his reported resurrection. Now, leading on from that, no one's ever come up with an explanation that's been satisfactory for why Jesus' dead body was never found after his death. Some people try and say his body was stolen. Well, the Romans were put on strong guard to make sure it wasn't stolen, and if it was stolen, they would have been in ridiculous trouble to the point where they'd probably been killed for, for letting his body be stolen. So they wouldn't have just like fallen asleep by the tomb. Like the stakes were hugely high for them. So then it's like, okay, what if the Roman soldiers themselves decided to take it? Well, when there was big riots around people claiming to have seen Jesus rise from the dead, and that was the last thing the Romans wanted, some kind of revolution. They would have quickly presented the body and gone, hang on a minute, Jesus is still dead. You guys can now pipe down and shut up. They never did that. Transformed lives. There were so many transformed lives off the back of Jesus' resurrection. Obviously, nowadays there are loads, but I'm thinking right at the time, in particular, Jesus' disciples, they gave up everything to tell other people about Jesus. Bearing in mind, a lot of these disciples were kind of a bit nervy before Jesus died. Peter denied Jesus, for example, and 11 out of the 12 of them gave up their lives brutally as well because they were so convinced about what Jesus had done and how he'd risen from the dead. Like one of them was crucified upside down. I think that was Peter. And it's like if they knew it was a hoax, when they're threatened with that kind of death, they'd put their hands up and say, "No, no, I'm making this up. This isn't true. Okay, you've caught me." Like they were like, "No, no, I'm going to go through hell in order to help other people to believe in this because this gospel message is life changing." And what's more, Jesus' brothers initially didn't believe that Jesus was who he claimed to be. Sometimes when someone's too close to home, if you've got siblings, you probably fight. They may have found Jesus annoying, claiming all these things over time, but actually after his resurrection, they were like, "Hang on a minute." Our brother was exactly who he was claiming to be all along. And then their lives were totally transformed after the resurrection. They passionately proclaimed the gospel, and they were key leaders in a lot of the early churches at the time. So again, that was big testimony to something crazy different happened in these lives of these people because of seeing Jesus having risen from the dead. Um, the reliability of the New Testament. So some of the things I've referred to here are referred to in the New Testament, but actually the New Testament in the Bible is one of the most reliable historical documents we have. There are over 15,000 original kind of copies of the New Testament compared to way, way, way less of other historical events that we refer to as fact we get taught in school. New Testament's way more reliable than those in terms of, yeah, its reliability. So that is incredibly compelling, and also the distance between when they were made and when the events happened is a lot shorter than a lot of these events we consider as fact too. So New Testament super super reliable, more than many of you may realize. The genealogy of Jesus is another fascinating thing where basically the whole of the line from Adam to Jesus is recorded in the Bible, and it all matches up. Like there is just a synergy there, and historically speaking, that is compelling. That all of these things match up. What the Old Testament teaches, what the New Testament teaches, it synergizes and links that Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies that were written about him. Obviously, many of those are in the Old Testament, and some of which included his place of birth and how he would die. So, these things you can't just manufacture. Certain things like riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, of course, anyone could do and say, "Oh, I'm Jesus." A lot of these things he couldn't physically manufacture, such as, like I said, where he was born, how he would die. Speaking of how he would die, read Isaiah 53 in your own time for the most accurate description of how Jesus was crucified, and that was written over 500 years before Jesus was born. That's compelling. Um, Another sort of thing to mention, we talked about the New Testament. There's loads of reliability for the Old Testament as well, such as the correlation we see with other historical sources and also archaeological discoveries. So Hezekiah's Tunnel, otherwise known as Siloam Tunnel, is an ancient 553 meter water conduit. Built in um, Jerusalem around 701 BC by King Hezekiah to secure the city's water supply. That's a long load of waffle, but the point is, a massive tunnel written about clearly in the Old Testament has been blatantly discovered today. Um, and it's just like, this is written in the Old Testament. This has been found today. It's as clear as day that what's described in the Old Testament has been what's found today. And that's one example of lots of historical sort of artifacts and archaeology that have been found that marry up with what the Bible teaches, both Old Testament and New Testament. But I thought I'd give you the Hezekiah's Siloam Tunnel, however you say it, is one of the greatest examples of that. It's so blatant and it's awesome. Google it if you want to learn more about that. And then, yeah, finally, the Christian faith is continuing to grow and change lives all over the world still today. I think it's the most diverse religion in terms of geographically all over the world because this is a faith that's not based on kind of culture and how you're brought up. It's based on a living God that is changing lives today. And all over the world, people are claiming, God's changed their lives. He's answered their prayers. He's encountered them. He's met with them. He's healed them. Um, there's all sorts of testimonies out there. Some of you guys watching this that go to New Day with us each year, you would hear of, hundreds of people claiming to be miraculously healed, and we've seen people get out of wheelchairs, and we've seen stories up the front where doctors haven't been able to even remotely explain how these things have happened. I did the maths and I worked out since New Day began, sort of around 20 years ago, there would have been over 5,000 healings that have been reported at New Day, and you think, okay, maybe a few of those could have been fabricated, or someone thought they were healed and it turned out they weren't, but over 5,000 with lots of medical reports backing them up, and friends and family seeing these people that have got to have wheelchairs and being like, what on earth's just happened? That's incredible. I fail to believe that every single one of those has been made up, plus the countless ones that you can find online, plus the countless lives that have been changed. People, bearing in mind, there's a lot of lives changed. You can learn about some of these on the Alpha Course. If you Google, on YouTube, like Alpha Course testimonies, there's like terrible criminals that have gone from awful things to having their lives completely changed for Jesus. Like, there are so many stories out there that point to a load of the evidence I've just referred to in terms of the existence of God, the evidence for Jesus, the Holy Spirit living in people's lives today and transforming lives. You just think, I just struggle to believe that every single one of those has been made up. All of this evidence isn't accurate. And personally, for myself, I know I've encountered God in a very real way, and I'm one of the hundreds, thousands, millions of people that's testifying to this truth. So, yeah, if you're watching this and aren't Christian, I hope it's been encouraging, and I hope there's some things you've taken from it that can both boost your faith and maybe help other people to find the truth of Jesus. If you're not a Christian watching this, then yeah, I do hope it's helped you to take steps closer towards considering God and considering faith, because if God isn't real, you forget about faith, you crack on with your life. But if it's real, it changes absolutely everything for the better, and it's something we need to take seriously. Jesus talks very seriously about life after death, and there's a huge benefit to knowing Christ in this life. There's also an eternal life after this one, where we need Jesus, and what He's done for us on the cross, and yeah. So at least if you've been even remotely compelled by what I've shared today, do look into it further. Do ask God to come into your life, change your life, give your heart to Jesus, and He will save you, and He will continue to boost your faith over time to a point where you can have more and more confidence in what He's done for you, and you can have more and more peace in life, knowing that He is real and He's with you and He's got you both in this life and the life to come. I'll leave it there. I hope it's been encouraging. Thanks so much for watching if you've made it this far. Do comment if you have any questions at all. I'd love to get back to you to help you on your journeys of faith. But for now, yeah, I'll leave it there, and I'll catch you guys whenever I next upload.